The sound of the funeral hymn for my father still rang in my ears as I pulled into the driveway. A moving truck loomed in front of the house, its rear doors yawning wide, swallowing up the pieces of my life. Two movers carefully maneuvered our leather couch, the one where Ryan and I spent countless Saturday mornings watching cartoons, down the front steps. I cut the engine, my hands trembling as I stepped out of the car. My black funeral dress snagged on the doorframe, but I barely noticed. Mark stood in the doorway, arms folded, overseeing the movers with the same detached expression he used when he supervised yard work. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Why are there movers at our house?" Mark glanced at me, his lips curving into a faint, almost smug smile. "Not our house anymore," he replied. "I sold it last week. You were so preoccupied with your mother and the funeral plans. You didn't notice the for sale sign." The world tilted, and I gripped the car door for balance. "You sold it?" My words came out in a disbelieving whisper. "Yep," he said casually, like he was discussing the weather. "Got a great price for it, too. Grace Parker handled the listing. You remember her from the Christmas party." Grace Parker, the blonde real estate agent who had spent that entire night laughing a little too hard at Mark's jokes and finding excuses to touch his arm. My stomach churned. "You can't sell the house without my permission," I said, trying to sound sure of myself, though doubt crept into my voice. "Oh, but I can," Mark countered smoothly. "Remember the power of attorney you signed last year? When I restructured our investments? Turns out you should have read the fine print." His smirk widened. My eyes drifted to the lawn, where Ryan's bicycle lay toppled over. One of the movers reached for it, and I snapped, "Don't touch that." My voice cracked as I turned back to Mark. "Where's Ryan?" "He's at David's house," Mark said, checking his phone. I thought it would be easier for him not to see all this. My chest tightened. "Easier for him? You mean easier for you?" Mark shrugged. "I've made arrangements for you and Ryan to stay at the extended stay on Richmond Avenue for now. That should give you time to figure things out." His nonchalance was infuriating. "Figure things out?" I echoed, my voice rising. "I just buried my father, Mark, and you're throwing us out of our home." He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Look, I'm sorry about your dad. Really. But let's not make this harder than it needs to be. I've already left you the car, and there's a stipend set up for Ryan until he turns 18. That's fair." "Fair?" The word felt bitter in my mouth. "You're dismantling our life while I'm at my father's funeral, and you call this fair?" "Timing is never perfect for these things," Mark replied dismissively, waving a hand. Through the open door, I could see the bare walls of what had once been our home. Family photos, Ryan's artwork, the mirror my grandmother had given us as a wedding gift. Everything was gone. 15 years of memories reduced to cardboard boxes and in different hands. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. Mark glanced at his watch. "Because I can." As if on cue, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and smiled. "Grace is waiting. Don't forget to pick up Ryan by 6. He strode toward his BMW, pausing to add, "Oh, and Layla? I'm keeping the good coffee maker. You never used it right anyway." I watched his car disappear down the street, my trembling hands falling still. The weight of the day, the loss of my father, the betrayal of my husband, crashed over me like a wave. But beneath the grief, something colder and harder began to take root. I pulled out my phone and dialed my brother's number. When Tommy answered, I wasted no time. "Mark just sold the house without telling me. I need your help." There was a pause, then Tommy's voice, steady and firm. "I'm on my way." Mark had underestimated me. That was his first mistake. And soon he would realize it would be his biggest. I turned to Emily, her smug confidence fueling the fire inside me. "Ruin my life? You mean the way they already did by stealing my future and handing it to you? Don't act like you don't know. You've benefited from it all while I worked myself to exhaustion for this family." Emily opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "And don't you dare pretend you're blameless. You watched it happen and let them rob me of every opportunity, because it suited you. The room was heavy with silence, tension crackling like a live wire. My father shifted uneasily, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, while my mother's sharp gaze bore into me like a knife. "You'll regret this," my mother finally said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Families stick together, Riley. You're tearing this one apart." I laughed bitterly.
No, Mom.
"You tore this family apart the moment you decided one child's success mattered more than the others. And now you can't handle the fact that I've finally figured it out." Emily's confidence faltered, her arms dropping to her sides. My father stepped forward as if to say something, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Save it, Dad. I don't want another excuse, another lecture, or another guilt trip. I'm done." I grabbed my bag from the couch and made my way to the door. Grace was already holding it open, her presence a steady reminder of the support I still had. "Riley," my mother called after me, her voice softer now, almost pleading. I turned back one last time. "This isn't about tearing us apart. This is about finally putting myself back together." I stepped outside into the cold evening air, the chill biting at my skin but awakening something deep inside me. Grace followed, resting a reassuring hand on my shoulder as I reached the car. "You were incredible in there," she said, her tone full of pride. "Eleanor would be so proud." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I just couldn't let them keep controlling me. Not anymore. We drove back to my tiny apartment in silence, the hum of the engine a comforting backdrop to my thoughts. By the time we arrived, I felt lighter, like shedding years of weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Inside, I immediately sat down at my desk, Eleanor's letter next to my laptop as I started planning my next steps. Financial aid applications, scholarships, anything that could help me cover tuition. The anger I felt earlier had transformed into determination. My parents had stolen enough from me.
Now.
Every choice I made would be for myself, my future, and the life I was ready to build. Later that night, as I lay on my mattress staring at the cracked ceiling, I felt a flicker of peace amidst the chaos. My parents might never understand, and Emily might never apologize. But I wasn't living for their approval anymore. This was my story now, and I was finally ready to write it my way. The next morning, I arrived at Starbucks on Main 10 minutes early, the weight of the night before still pressing on my chest. Grace was already there, perched at a corner table with her designer handbag and a latte, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. Her sunglasses sat on the table beside her, as though she'd just stepped off a magazine cover. As I approached, she looked up, her face lighting up in a carefully practiced smile. "Layla," she said, her voice dripping with faux warmth. "Thanks for meeting me." I slid into the chair across from her, keeping my face neutral. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Grace. Why am I here?" Her smile faltered, but only for a second. She took a sip of her latte, as if she were pondering how to phrase her response. "I wanted to clear the air," she began. "I know this situation is complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You helped my husband sell our house while I was burying my father. That's not complicated, Grace. That's despicable." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she kept her tone measured. "I wasn't aware of the funeral when the sale went through, Layla. Mark didn't mention it." "How convenient," I said, folding my arms. "But you knew he was married. You knew he had a family. And you still went through with it." She sighed, leaning forward slightly. "Look, Mark said the marriage was already over. He said you two had been drifting apart for years and that he was just tying up loose ends. I believed him." I barked a short laugh, drawing a few glances from other patrons. "So, that makes it okay? To destroy someone's life based on his lies?" Grace bristled, but kept her composure. "I didn't come here to fight, Layla. I came here to offer a solution." "A solution?" I echoed. She nodded, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "Mark's agreed to a settlement. A generous one, all things considered. He wants to avoid a drawn-out legal battle, for Ryan's sake." I stared at the envelope, my stomach churning. Mark's generosity was nothing more than a calculated move to shut me up. I met Grace's gaze, my voice steady. And what do you get out of this? Her expression didn't change, but her fingers tensed slightly around her coffee cup. Closure, she said simply. Closure. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. I leaned in, lowering my voice. You and Mark think you've won. You think you can bulldoze over me and call it a compromise. But here's the thing. Grace, this isn't over. Not by a long shot. Her smile froze, the first crack in her polished veneer. Layla, be reasonable. No. I cut her off, standing up. You and Mark can play your little games.
But you've underestimated me.
And that's a mistake you're both going to regret. I grabbed the envelope, tucking it under my arm as I turned to leave. Layla, Grace called after me. Her voice sharper now. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I looked back at her, a cold smile on my lips. Oh, Grace. You haven't even seen hard yet. As I walked out into the crisp morning air, I texted Tommy. Get me everything you have on Mark's offshore accounts. Grace is involved too. Let's blow this whole thing wide open. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about taking back control of my life, my future, and most importantly, Ryan's. Mark and Grace thought they were playing a game they'd already won. But they didn't realize they'd just handed me the playbook. Grace Parker's warnings echoed in my head as I drove home, her desperate plea playing over and over like a broken record. Mark's dangerous. Walk away. Take the settlement. She was right about one thing. Mark was dangerous. But she didn't know me well enough to realize I wasn't the walking away type. Not when my father's trust, my son's security, and 15 years of my life were on the line. The files Tommy sent sat heavy in my inbox. Bank transfers, property deals. Red flags that screamed of a man drowning in schemes too big to control. And now, it wasn't just about the house or the betrayal. It was about unraveling the empire Mark and Grace had built on lies. I pulled into the motel parking lot, the neon sign flickering in the early evening haze. Ryan was with Tommy tonight, safe and unaware of the storm brewing. I climbed the creaky stairs to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened my laptop. Tommy's files confirmed what I already suspected. Mark had been skimming for years, hiding transactions under bogus property flips and shell companies. Grace wasn't just an accomplice. She was the key to unraveling the entire mess. One email in particular caught my attention, a thread between Grace and Mark, dated just before the house sale. Mark, need you to expedite the closing. Layla's distracted with her dad. Perfect timing. Grace, she'll figure it out eventually. Are you sure about this? Mark, she won't fight. She never does. I stared at the screen, my rage hardening into resolve. You underestimated me, Mark. I whispered. Big mistake. The next morning, I called Tommy. I need you to find out where Grace will be this afternoon, I said. Somewhere public. Layla, what are you planning? She's scared, Tommy. I'm going to make her more scared. By noon, Tommy had her location, a trendy downtown wine bar.
Perfect.
I arrived early, choosing a table near the back, where I could see without being seen. Grace walked in minutes later, her face pale, her confidence cracked. When she sat at the bar, I approached, sliding into the stool beside her. You again? Her tone was sharp, but her eyes betrayed her nerves. Don't look so surprised, I said, keeping my voice calm. I told you this isn't over. Grace scoffed, stirring her drink. What do you want, Layla? I leaned closer. The truth. All of it. About Mark, the money, the schemes. And you're going to give it to me. She laughed bitterly. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the email thread, I'll make sure the feds see this. And believe me, Grace, you're an accessory to everything he's done. You'll go down just as hard as he will. Her hand froze mid-motion. You're bluffing. Am I? I scrolled to a file Tommy had sent, Grace's bankruptcy filing, the suspension of her real estate license. How do you think this will look in court? A bankrupt agent with a suspended license helping a man launder millions? You think Mark's going to protect you? He's already setting you up to take the fall. Grace's face crumpled. She downed the rest of her wine in one gulp, her hand trembling as she set the glass down. You don't know what he's capable of, she whispered. Try me, I said, my voice steel. She hesitated, then reached for her bag, pulling out a flash drive. This has everything, she said, sliding it across the bar. Property deals, bank transfers, client names. But you didn't get it from me. I pocketed the drive. What's his next move? Grace hesitated again, then leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. He's meeting with investors tomorrow. They're pressuring him to pay up, and he's running out of options. If they don't get their money, they'll come after him. And trust me, Layla, they're worse than he is. I nodded, standing to leave. You made the right choice, Grace. Let's hope it's enough to save you. As I walked out of the bar, the weight of the flash drive in my pocket felt like a ticking time bomb. Mark had played his games long enough. Now it was my turn. That night, I sat in the motel room, poring over the contents of the flash drive. The evidence was damning, enough to bring Mark's entire empire crashing down. I called Tommy. Get ready, I said. We're taking this to the authorities. And Mark. I looked at Ryan's sleeping face, peaceful and innocent, and felt the full force of my resolve. He's going to learn what it feels like to lose everything. A new text from Tommy. Grace's meeting place confirmed. Same wine bar as before. 3 p.m. tomorrow. I slipped the manila envelope into my bag, locking eyes with David. You need to leave town. Tonight. If Mark finds out you helped me. I know, he interrupted, his voice hollow. But running won't fix this. When the FBI comes knocking, I'll cooperate. I paused at the door, considering his words. For your sake, I hope you do. As I drove back to the motel, David's words rang in my ears. These aren't the kind of people who accept excuses. Mark had tangled himself, and by extension, me, into something far more dangerous than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about stolen money or broken promises anymore. If Mark's lies unraveled, it wouldn't just be the authorities coming for him. I parked outside the motel and took a moment to steady my breath. Ryan was inside with my mother, probably playing with his action figures, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. I had to protect him, no matter the cost. The next afternoon, I arrived at the wine bar early. This time, I wasn't just armed with suspicions and questions. The manila envelope sat heavy in my bag, alongside Tommy's files and a hidden recording device clipped to my bra. Grace arrived precisely at 3 p.m., her movements more frantic than before. She slid into the seat across from me, her manicured hands clutching a tablet. I have proof, she blurted. So do I. I placed the envelope between us, but didn't open it. Let's see yours first. She hesitated, her eyes darting around the bar. Mark's been lying to me. To everyone. He's in over his head, Layla. He used my name to close deals I never authorized. Moved money through accounts I didn't even know existed. Why tell me this now? Because I'm scared, she admitted, her voice trembling. The investors he's dealing with, they're dangerous. If this blows up, they won't care who knew what. They'll come after anyone connected to him, including me. And Ryan, I added pointedly. Her face paled. I didn't want this. I thought we were building a future together. I leaned forward. Then help me stop him. Give me everything. She placed the tablet on the table and opened a folder labeled contracts and transfers. The screen filled with spreadsheets, emails, and signatures, Mark's, mine, and hers, all pointing to a web of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. This is enough to bury him, I said, scrolling through the files. Grace looked at me, desperation in her eyes. What happens now? Now, I said, sliding the envelope toward her. We play a little game. That evening, I met with Tommy in his cramped office, surrounded by monitors and stacks of paper. You sure about this? He asked, glancing at the flash drive Grace had provided.
Positive, I said.
We need to make Mark think Grace turned on him. Let him panic and make mistakes. Tommy nodded, already typing furiously. If he's as desperate as you say, this will push him over the edge. And when he does, I said, pulling out my phone to call the FBI tip line, we'll be ready. Mark's text came the next morning. You think you're smart, Layla? You think you can outplay me? Watch your back. I smiled grimly, forwarding the message to Tommy. Mark had no idea the walls were already closing in. For Ryan, for my father, and for myself, this fight wasn't over. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally winning. Grace's text was cryptic but chilling. We need to talk. Not about Mark. About Ryan's safety. Suddenly, everything clicked. Mark's rushed house sale, Grace's warnings, David's shaking hands. This wasn't just about betrayal or stolen money. Ryan, my son, was in the crosshairs of something far darker. David's voice trembled as he slid the manila envelope across his desk. Mark's planning to leave the country.
Soon.
And he's filed for full custody of Ryan. The envelope felt like it weighed 100 pounds, filled with damning secrets. But as the weight of betrayal pressed against me, a new resolve crystallized in its place. I pulled out my phone and texted Grace. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. same place. Bring your proof. Then Tommy. Get Mom and Ryan out of town.
Now.
Finally, I turned back to David. When the FBI comes knocking, tell them everything. And tell them about the sister-in-law Mark paid off to disappear 3 years ago. David paled. How do you know? I'm a nurse, I said, clutching the envelope tighter. I know how to keep secrets. But now, I'm done keeping his. Mom's kitchen hadn't changed in decades. The same checkered curtains and cinnamon-scented air wrapped around me like a bittersweet memory. Ryan sat at the table, stacking sugar packets into a fortress while Tommy paced. The cabin's ready, Tommy said. 3 hours north, no internet, no prying eyes. Mom's hands shook as she stirred her coffee. I'm not hiding while my daughter fights alone. I knelt by her chair, my voice steady but urgent. It's not hiding, Mom. It's protecting Ryan. Her eyes searched mine, filled with worry she couldn't voice. What aren't you telling me? Before I could answer, Tommy's laptop pinged. He leaned in and swore under his breath. Mark's moving fast. Large withdrawals. Account closures. And he paused, glancing at Ryan. Hey, buddy. Why don't you show Grandma your new game? Once Ryan and Mom left the room, Tommy turned the screen toward me. He's booked 3 tickets to Venezuela. Tomorrow night. Him, Grace, and Ryan. He can't take Ryan without my consent. Tommy's jaw tightened. He can with these. He showed me the custody papers Mark had filed that morning. The judge's signature glared back at me. Harrison, one of Mark's golf buddies. My phone buzzed. Grace had texted. Mark knows I talked to David.
Please help me.
Meeting at the house in 30 minutes. Come alone.
She's panicking, Tommy said.
You can't trust her. No, I replied, grabbing my keys. But I can use her. Driving to what used to be my home felt surreal. The streets that once symbolized comfort now felt foreign, tainted by betrayal. Grace's car sat in the driveway, its presence proof of her desperation. The house felt hollow, stripped of life and meaning. Grace stood in the living room, clutching a USB drive. Everything's here, she whispered. The accounts, the deals, the names. Enough to bury him. Why are you helping me? I asked, distrust lacing my words. Because I loved him, she said, her laugh bitter. Or I thought I did. Until the threat started. Her words hung in the air as my phone buzzed. Tommy's message was chilling. FBI lost the wire.
Get out now.
Grace caught the shift in my expression. He's coming, isn't he? She shoved the USB into my hand.
Take it.
But there's something else you need to know. The sister-in-law who disappeared. The slam of a car door cut her off. Grace's face drained of color. Back door, she hissed.
Go.
I'll stall him. From behind the garden shed, I heard Mark's voice, sharp and venomous. You thought you could outsmart me? Grace tried to deflect, but the sound of his anger escalated. words turning to something physical. My phone lit up again. Tommy's message was a desperate plea. Get out now. I gripped the USB, heart pounding, and dialed Agent Roberts. Agent Roberts, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos. I'm ready to talk. About everything.
Mom.
Can we get pancakes after school? Ryan's bright, innocent words played in my head. He wasn't just my son, he was my reason. I met Mark's cold gaze and forced my hand to steady as I picked up the pen. You think you've won. Mark's grin widened. I always win, Layla. The ink barely touched the paper before I drove the pen deep into his hand, twisting it hard. He howled in pain, dropping the custody papers. You don't get to take him. I spat, backing away as he clutched his bleeding hand. Mark lunged, but the sound of a gun being cocked froze him in place. FBI.
Step back.
Agent Roberts's voice rang out as she burst through the door, gun trained on Mark. Behind her, 2 agents stormed in, forcing him to his knees. Mark's confident facade shattered as cuffs clicked around his wrists. This isn't over, Layla, he snarled. It is for you, I said, my voice like steel. As the agents led him away, Roberts turned to me. We lost the wire signal, but the surveillance team got everything from outside. I nodded, my legs threatening to give out. Layla, Roberts's voice softened. We'll keep Ryan safe, and we'll make sure Mark never gets near him again. Back at Mom's cabin, Ryan bolted into my arms the moment I walked through the door. His warmth, his familiar scent, it grounded me in a way nothing else could.
Mom.
Where were you? I was worried. I'm here now, I whispered, holding him tightly. And I'm not going anywhere. Tommy stood nearby, his face a mix of relief and concern. FBI's got Mark in custody. They'll unravel his whole operation. Good, I said, brushing Ryan's hair back. Tommy hesitated. Layla, about what Mark said. I checked the records. I stiffened, waiting for the truth I wasn't sure I could bear. It's true. Sarah was Ryan's biological mother. The world tilted, but I forced myself to stay steady for Ryan. It doesn't matter, I said firmly. Tommy frowned. Are you sure? I looked down at Ryan, his innocent eyes searching mine. I'm his mom. I've been there every day of his life. That's what matters. Tommy nodded, his respect clear. Mom, what's wrong? Ryan asked, sensing my emotions. Nothing, sweetheart, I said, cupping his face. Everything's okay now. And for the first time in months, I believed it. Mark's empire was crumbling, and Ryan and I had a future free of his manipulation. As I tucked Ryan into bed that night, he reached for my hand. Mom, can we get pancakes tomorrow? I smiled, my heart swelling with love. Of course, baby. Anything you want. Because no matter what the past held, Ryan was my son. And I would fight to protect him, always. As I sliced carrots, Ryan held up a faded photo of Sarah cradling him as a baby. She looks like me, he said softly. I paused, my heart aching at the tenderness in his voice.
She does, I said.
You have her eyes. Her courage, too. Do you think she'd be mad at me for loving you? Ryan's voice was barely above a whisper. I knelt beside him, taking his small hand in mine. Ryan, your mom loved you so much. And if she were here, I think she'd be proud of the amazing person you're becoming. She'd want you to have as much love in your life as possible. He nodded, his little face serious as he set the photo down. I'm glad I have both of you. Tears pricked my eyes, but I smiled through them. Me too, buddy. The doorbell rang, breaking the moment. Tommy walked in, carrying a stack of papers and his laptop. Updates, he said, setting everything on the table. Ryan excused himself to his room, clutching Sarah's diary. Tommy sat down, his face a mix of relief and lingering tension. Mark's formally charged. Racketeering, money laundering, fraud, you name it. Grace's testimony and the USB drive sealed the deal. And Judge Harrison? FBI's got him on bribery and obstruction. It's all over the news. Tommy grinned. Mark's empire is crumbling, piece by piece.
Good.
I turned back to the stove, stirring the soup with renewed determination. Tommy leaned back, watching me. You're holding up pretty well, considering. I don't have a choice, I said. Ryan needs stability. He needs to know he's safe now. You've done more than that, Layla. Tommy gestured toward the photo on the table. You've given him truth. And love. That's more than Mark ever could. I nodded, letting his words sink in. As dinner simmered, Ryan returned, holding the diary to his chest. Can we go to the park tomorrow? Of course, I said, ruffling his hair. Can I bring the diary? I want to write something in it for her. My throat tightened, but I nodded. I think she'd love that. As I tucked Ryan in that night, he clung to me for a moment longer than usual. Good night, Mom, he whispered. Good night, sweetheart, I replied, kissing his forehead. When I closed his door, I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet of the house settle around me. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't carrying the weight of secrets or fear. The truth had shattered so much, but it had also built something new. Stronger.
Freer.
I turned off the lights and went to bed, ready to face whatever tomorrow held. Because for Ryan and me, it was a future worth fighting for. She liked poetry, Ryan said, holding up a worn notebook. Like me. I paused mid-chop, the knife hovering over the carrot. You write poetry? He shrugged, his face tinged with shyness. Sometimes. About everything that happened. From the living room, Tommy's voice carried as he adjusted the last of the security cameras, a precaution we'd all agreed on. Even with Mark in custody. Kid's got real talent, Tommy said, leaning against the doorframe. Found his notebook last week. Impressive stuff. Mom walked in, balancing a pile of laundry. She glanced at Ryan, her eyes softening. Just like Sarah, she said, setting the clothes down. She sent me her poems before everything fell apart. Ryan's head shot up. You knew her? Mom hesitated, her hands smoothing the folded fabric. She came to me once. Told me about Mark, about the money. I didn't understand everything then, but I knew she was scared. She trusted me with something for you. She pulled a yellowed envelope from her pocket, the edges worn from years of keeping. This was hers. She wanted you to have it when the time was right. Ryan's small hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Sarah's elegant handwriting flowing across it. Read it, I encouraged gently. Ryan's voice quivered as he began. They say blood makes family, but love makes truth. In darkness or light, two mothers' hearts beat for you. The words hung heavy in the room, a poignant reminder of the woman who had loved Ryan first. Before we could process the moment, the doorbell rang. Agent Roberts stood on the porch, Grace beside him. She was out of her sling, but carried the weariness of someone who had seen too much. It's done, Roberts announced. Mark's plea deal is official. 20 years minimum. The cartel ties sealed his fate. And the house? I asked, my voice catching in my throat. Seized as evidence, Grace said. She handed me a stack of photos. But I found these in Mark's office. Figured they'd mean more to you than to an evidence locker. They were snapshots of Ryan's first steps, his birthday parties, the little milestones I thought had been erased along with our home. Ryan appeared beside me, clutching Sarah's poem. Did you know my mom too? Grace knelt, her voice soft but steady. No, but I wish I had. She must have been incredible, braver than most of us. Roberts interrupted, holding a new file. One more thing. Those fertility records Mark mentioned? They were altered. Not by you, by Sarah. My heart stopped. Why would she do that? Robert's gaze was steady. She wanted to protect Ryan. She made sure that if anything happened to her, you would be his legal mother. She chose you, Layla. Ryan looked up at me, his eyes wide. Mom, can we hang her picture in my room? Next to ours? I pulled him close. Of course, baby. She'd love that. After Roberts and Grace left, we sat around the kitchen table. The pile of photos and Sarah's notebook lay between us, symbols of the past that had shaped our present. Ryan flipped through the notebook, occasionally stopping to trace her words with his fingers. "Mom," he said, looking up. "I wrote something too. Want to hear it?" I smiled, feeling the weight of his trust. "Always." He opened his notebook, the handwriting uneven but filled with care. 2 hearts. One gave me life. One gives me home. Both gave me love. Tommy wiped at his eyes, pretending not to. Mom squeezed my hand, her grip steady and full of unspoken reassurance. Outside, the world moved on. Mark faced justice, Grace sought redemption, and the wounds of betrayal began to scar over. But inside, around that table, something new was growing. Not the family we'd lost or the illusion we'd once clung to, but a family rebuilt from hard truths and unshakable love. As Ryan's voice grew stronger with every word, I realized the greatest victory wasn't in tearing down what had hurt us. It was in building something beautiful from the ruins.